Today we are making the Chore coat by Allis Patterns. I have made one of her sewing patterns before, the Cosette dress, and I made that actually in 2023, at the end of 2023, and I live in it. So I'm super excited to make this jacket. I think it'll be a really good wardrobe staple. And I actually cut out this project last month, but I was trying really hard to save it to be the first project of 2025. So let's get to sewing. So I already read through all of the sewing pattern instructions before I got started, and I actually like to do that with every single project. I think it just really helps prepare you for what is to come. And I think it's going to be a really easy jacket to make. It's fun because you start with the pockets. I think the pockets are just like a fun, cute little detail, so it's kind of fun to start with those. And I'm not even gonna bother changing my sewing thread right now on my serger because these pockets are on the inside, so this seam, you're never gonna see it. And that's the fun of when you are sewing your own clothes. You can kind of make up your own rules. The fabric that I'm using for this project is from Blackbird Fabrics, definitely one of my favorite online retailers to shop from. And this is a dead stock fabric. This fabric is being given a second life by being resold through Blackbird Fabrics, and it is dry clean only. So I didn't have to worry about pre-washing my fabric for this because it's a dry clean only project. Next up was the task of pinning the pockets onto the main bodice of the jacket, which wasn't too difficult for placement. The pattern, of course, comes with lines so that you know where to place the pockets, but you definitely want to take your time with this, making sure that the pockets are even on both sides, and then also making sure that they're pinned nice and flat on top of the jacket so that you don't have any weird puckering. I'm definitely happy with how these turned out. All right, I've got the back piece, the front piece, and one sleeve attached. And here you can kind of already get the vibe of it. You know what I just realized? I never grabbed buttons. I'm gonna have to figure out buttons too. Honestly, it took the longest to install the patch pockets on the front. It took longer to install those two pockets than it did to sew up the sleeves and the front and back bodice all together. That was super quick. And now it is time to just pin everything together and sew up the side seam directly down into the sleeve, which is just such a nice, easy way instead of having to, fit a sleeve into a sleeve cap. The design of this jacket also is somewhat of a raglan, so that wouldn't be happening anyway, but I do love when a sewing pattern has you finish up a jacket or a top this way. I think it's just so much easier. And when I'm getting to this underarm seam, I just want to make sure that my seams are laying flat and open to help reduce bulk. Instructions do tell you to press these seams open, and that is why, but this fabric can't really iron it very well. It's very stiff and it's felted, so I didn't want to burn it. So that's why I'm just paying extra attention to this part. And from there, you have made the outside of the jacket, so this is a good time to try it on and make sure it fits how you like it, that everything's nicely sewn, because you can really get a good vibe of how the jacket is going to look at this point. And before you attach any facing pieces or the collar or the lining, this is also another good point to stop and make sure that you don't want to take any fabric out of the side seam or out of the sleeve. This is a good point to do that and to make all those modifications. The lining on the inside has this really cool full width pocket. So if you, for some reason, didn't want to use the patch pockets on the outside and you just wanted to toss something on the inside, you've got lining pockets, which I think is a really nice little added detail that takes this from kind of just an at-home DIY project to a real, like something that you could buy at the store, which I always appreciate. So at this point, I've been sewing for about 3 hours. I was able to assemble the main jacket with the pockets. I sewed up the neck facing, and I also sewed the entirety of the lining together. So I'm gonna pick this back up tomorrow where I need to attach the neck facing to the lining and then work on the collar and then attach all that to the main jacket and then finish it up. It is Friday, which is technically day 3 of me working on this project. Day 2, I really only sewed for like 5 minutes. So a bulk of the work has been done on day 1, so I'm at just over 3 hours of sewing. I have the outer shell of the jacket complete. I also have the inner lining with the facing attached for the inside of the jacket, and now it is time to work on the collar. As I was working on this jacket and I was looking at it on my mannequin, I almost went without the collar, but then I decided it was a design detail that I wanted to keep. So my steps here are to just sew the collar pieces right sides together, and then I will top stitch along the perimeter. And I only have about 45 minutes to sew today. It is the middle of the workday. So I'm giving myself a break from my day job to get some sewing done because I would like to finish this jacket this month. So with all that sewn together, I need to turn this to the right side and attempt to give this a good pressing before I do my top stitching, although as you've heard me say, this fabric is not that easy to press. I have to use a really low heat because it does have kind of like a felt-like quality to it. And you know what? I'm actually going to trim down some of these seam allowances because that feels really thick. I'm just going to trim down these curved edges close to the stitching, but not too close because I wouldn't want anything to unravel. So I pressed the collar to the best of my abilities given the fabric, and what I have done here is I have used my pattern weights to put on top of those seams that I just pressed. I'm going to let the fabric cool down with the pattern weights on top. Usually you would do this with something that's called a clapper, but I don't own one. So I'm going to use these coasters, let this cool down. Hopefully that will help keep the seam nice and pressed before I do my top stitching. I haven't worked on a jacket pattern or anything that really has a lining where the collar just gets tucked right in between since probably 2020. So that means I don't have to worry about being super precise with catching the collar stand and everything like you do on a collared blouse where everything has to be very accurate because you can actually see the collar kind of from both sides. But what's nice about this jacket is that the collar is actually just sewn to the top of the jacket and then this seam gets caught within the lining. So it's just much easier to sew than like a standard collar on a blouse. Like it's easier. Maybe that's just like the lazy person in me talking, but it's definitely easier to get a more neat collar when you're working with a lining. So I'm just going to sew this collar to the top of the jacket here, and that takes care of the collar. I'm not used to a collar being that quick to sew. So clean. Oh, it's looking so good. And with that, it's time to attach the lining. And that really can like change the fit of the jacket. Like the jacket looks good when I have it on, but it looks like it's just missing a little something, like it's a little too light. So once I install the lining, it's gonna give the jacket like the final little bit of body that it needs to look like a professionally made jacket. So I'm gonna get to work on that now. Now, if you are a beginner, I think sewing the two sleeves together is most likely going to be the most confusing part of this pattern for you. I don't think the illustration is very clear, but you know, this isn't marketed as a beginner pattern, so I don't, I'm not knocking the product for that. I just know that there's a lot of you beginners who watch my videos to see if this is a project that you can sew, and I definitely think it is. I think you'll just want to be careful when you're working on attaching the two sleeve ends together before you turn the jacket to the right side. I have the insane task of taking this crazy inside out mess and turning it to the right side. And you want to be really careful when you are working with this part. You want to be gentle, but basically what you are looking for is the opening that you left in the sleeve lining, and that is how you are going to turn everything to the right side. You definitely want to be careful to not rip the stitching or the lining itself, especially if your lining is like a little bit thin. This is hard to do standing, so I'm gonna go do this off camera real quick. I'm still working on getting everything right side. I find it easy once you get everything through the first hole to stick your arm into the lining and just kind of give it a shimmy. And eventually your hand will pop through. And you can see that I'm gonna need to give everything a good pressing and then also like push everything out on the corners before I close up any of the holes in the sleeves in the lining. Because if I close those first, then I won't be able to get into these corners and it'll just be kind of a nightmare. So I'm going to work on getting all these corners nice and flat. I'll give them another pressing. Kind of winded. And then I will do the top stitching on the entirety of the outside of the jacket. That is it for day 3 of sewing. Initially today I was only going to sew for about 45 minutes, but I did find some extra time to work on the jacket. So I'm going to say that brings us to just over, let's say 4.5 hours of sewing, and we're just about done with the jacket. So I will see you tomorrow. This jacket sat on my mannequin for quite a few days until I figured out what I wanted to do with the buttons, and ultimately I decided to take some that I had in my stash and cover them with the same fabric that the jacket is made of. And I'm just using a glue stick here, not for like to actually glue them together, but just to kind of stabilize them while I'm working with the button and the fabric. To be honest, this was not easy. Here you will see I'm using my coasters again just to kind of hold those in place while the glue dries. But what was not easy about this type of project was that the fabric was so thick that I had a really hard time hiding the back of the buttons once I got all the fabric to gather around the button. So I just kind of did a basting running stitch here all the way around the button and then pulled tight, which created kind of a gather effect around the button. But that creates what's called a shank on the back of the button, and since this fabric is so thick, it just had a really hard time laying flat. Guys, this was not quick. It took me at least an hour to work on these 6 buttons, just getting them covered with the fabric and then trying to attach them to the jacket. The end look, I really like how it turned out, but in the future, I will just get a button making kit and use a lighter fabric. So my little crosshair pins are in place. The pins running down this way, make sure that I start the buttonholes at the right place, and then the pin in the middle there properly marks where the middle of the button is. So now I'm just going to sew the buttonholes. Here is the final look of the jacket. I love the way this turned out. I love the oversized felt buttons, even if they don't fit in the buttonholes. So I'm gonna have to figure out something about that. And the pockets are definitely super useful. So really happy with how this one turned out. Let me know if there's any other sewing patterns you would like to see me try out, and I'll see you in the next one.